Hello and welcome. Today we're in the upcoming Tier 8 Italian cruiser, the Amalfi, or Verona. But I'm gonna go with Amalfi because well, that's what it says in game for now. And she's still a work in progress, meaning that she is subject to change, and I kinda do hope that she changes. Around the 13-14 minute mark, you'll see the well, I'll show her in the port and discuss some of the stats and quite a few of the problems that I find with her and some of the other Italian cruisers. So, we're on a match of shards, and because of my incredible fuel smoke, which is something you'll see in action soon enough, I am willing to take the risk of going into the B cap. Now, another thing to keep in mind on a ship like this, or the Italian cruisers, is that they don't have HE. You can see we have SAP and we have AP. You should think of SAP as though it's AP, except instead of the penetration calculation where it decides whether a shell shatters or not, that part works like HE, except it has slightly better values, so it's divided by 4, so it's 54 millimeters on this one. Meaning that if a ship angles towards you, you can still bounce shells, or I suppose the shells can still bounce on angled targets, but they won't overpenetrate. And we can see a elephant task right in front of me, so I'm gonna use my fuel smoke. And at this point I guess I should just turn away because I don't know what to do other than run away. I do fire my guns, which does get me spotted, and I do take 2 torpedoes. The reason I fire my guns against this destroyer is because, first of all, she was kinda broadside, and the SAP can deal a lot of alpha damage to destroyers. Because they actually hit harder than AP, but obviously they can't Citadel, which means that they can deal a huge amount of damage in one go. However, of course, because I am spotted in the smoke and I'm one of the closest ships to quite many enemies, I took a lot of damage in return. So obviously the fuel smoke doesn't make you invulnerable, but it does help a lot in cases where you aren't spotted by, well, a destroyer. But at this point I've probably gotten away with it. I mean, the ship is really fast. She goes almost 39 knots while being still very maneuverable. I think the reason she goes this fast is the racing stripes you can see on the bow of the ship. They probably do make her go faster, especially since they're red. But unfortunately, we didn't manage to sink the elephant task, and I did take a good 33k damage in return, but that's okay, I have adrenaline rush. It was actually all according to plan to help me deal more damage. So, at this point, my thinking goes, well, I can't go and contest the middle cap zone, so I should probably start heading slowly towards the A cap. But right now I can still try to pick targets because I am not the closest ship to all that many enemies, meaning that I should be able to still shell enemies while not being shot at too much. It's particularly nice because SAP is very useful against destroyers because they obviously deal a lot of damage per shell. Well, actually I guess I already explained that one. The alpha is very nice. It's not quite as nice as Venezia, but it's decent enough. Now, the downside is that your 16-second reload does mean that your DPM is kinda lacking. I go into more detail in the port section of the video later, but basically, suffice to say, there are quite a few light cruisers that deal more DPM with their HE shells than the Amalfi deals with their SAP shells. And HE shells can also start fires, and they don't care about angles, which makes the firepower on this ship feel kinda lacking. On the bright side though, the shell characteristics on the Amalfi, and I suppose the other Italian cruisers, are actually really good. Which means that you can actually hit your target reasonably well even at long distances. It's just too bad that her maximum range is limited to 16 kilometers, which is basically what other tier 8 cruisers get. And so you can't really take too much advantage of this. But I mean, it can be quite annoying, especially combined with the good maneuverability of the ship, to deal quite a bit of damage to some ships that aren't angling against you. And so you can be this long-range annoying type ship, kinda like the Henris, except you don't start fires, which does disappoint at times, but on the other hand does mean that you're probably more dangerous to destroyers and cruisers at long range than quite a few of the other cruisers. I mean, look, it's a destroyer at 12 kilometers and I can easily hit her. Of course, you know, she didn't exactly turn, but I mean, 5k damage at 12 kilometers? You don't get other cruisers doing this too often, right? Even cruisers like, say, the Atago, who also have a 16-second reload. And that's the Farragut gone. I did have to use my fuel smoke, so I'm gonna shell a few times and then start turning away, because, well, I only have 10k HP left after the 2 torpedoes I took, but that was kinda my fault. The torpedoes on the ship are... I would say they're not good, but they're usable. And even at range, which is something you can't say for the torpedoes of many cruisers, because they simply don't have the range. You have to get a bit too close to use them. Now, they do have a problem though, which is that they only deal, I think it's 12k damage. Meaning that they hit about as hard as a penetrating hit from a battleship, but it's better than nothing, and they're still torpedoes, which means that it makes enemies panic. The other thing is that they have a very fast reload. I mean, I thought they're like less than a minute, I think. Which means that you can launch these torpedoes quite often. Maybe it's above a minute. I discuss more of that again in the port section of the video. And this means that you can actually just throw out the torpedoes quite often and just hope for the best. I mean, I've hit destroyers with these torpedoes at times, and because people just don't expect them, because they do have some good range. Overall though, I don't think the Italian cruisers, the mid-tier ones, are in a good place. Venezia felt great, but the mid-tier ones, they feel disappointing. Not quite as disappointing as the Genoa does, but I mean, it's close enough. Here though, you'll see the Amalfi in her element, because it's a light cruiser at 12 kilometers, showing me broadside, meaning that I should be able to get some nice citadels on this Edinburgh. I suppose maybe not that too many, because she doesn't have the HP anymore, but at least it's a little bit. Oh, she's super healing, which is very nice, because that means I get to deal more damage to her. By the way, this is actually the best game I had in her, the Amalfi, at least damage-wise. And, yeah, I didn't have too many great games in mid-tier Italian cruisers. So that's probably why I also feel they're disappointing. Or maybe I didn't have that many high damage games because they are disappointing, you know. Could be one or the other. Regardless though, considering how much damage I took at the start and how I probably made a mistake by going there, well, I've done a lot better than I expected. And honestly, I think I would have been quite okay there if I just hadn't tried to do the derpy turn away and just used my smoke, dodged the torpedoes and then ran away. Even if I had fired my guns, I probably would have been better off, because those 2 torpedoes hit really hard. But that's one of the things that is a disadvantage on these cruisers. They don't have the access to hydro or defensive fire. And the anti-air doesn't feel the greatest, which you'll see in action later. I mean, consider that the enemy CV is tier 6. Right now though, I have this nice Gneisenau being very cooperative by showing me broadside, meaning that my SAP is fairly effective. I do have the possibility of using a fuel smoke if I so desired, but I expect the Gneisenau to go into the, or go behind the island soon enough, or pick a different target. and then it doesn't really matter as much. Okay, let's dodge. Jesus, this one could have been dangerous, but luckily it was fine. I guess I could also take shots on the Warspite. But the grass is actually showing me broadside, so perhaps I'll get lucky. Come on. We want to punish this cruiser. I do start using my smoke because I'm not paying attention to the battleships, meaning that it could be quite dangerous to just keep sailing while not paying attention to them when they keep firing at me. I'm disappointed. 6 ricochets. But I do have to turn away because if I keep sailing in that direction, I'm pretty sure I'm just going to go down very quickly and won't get anything in return for it. So let's just run away, hope that the Leon probably tanks for me, and then just keep shelling the opposing ships. I am a bit closer to them than I would like to be, but it's fine. I believe in the Leon's ability to be the shell magnet. I guess one thing I could do is I could try to push the Gneisenau and the cruiser over there, the Nürnberg. Because I do have torpedoes, even though they might not hit very hard. I mean, at close range, if you can hit multiple of them, it can be good enough. And hopefully I can get behind the island before the Warspite hits me. And I did. That was very nice. I suppose it wouldn't really have mattered whether I fired a SAP or AE against the Warspite there. I probably would have done about the same amount of damage. Okay, it's a minute and 20-second reload. That's a nice settle on the Nürnberg. I'm gonna just keep shelling the Nürnberg and fire torpedoes at the Gneisenau again. The torpedo firing angles are very good though, which is something that's not appreciated enough, I think. 2 torpedo hits, they did a massive 15k damage, well, almost 16k. But these should finish her off. Unfortunately, I only have 2700 HP and I'm being attacked by a CV. I mean, I've shot down quite a few planes, but again, keep in mind that this is a tier 6 CV. Okay, 800 HP. I think this last turret is the last shot I get to take. So I launch my plane to give spotting to my allies, and come on! Aww. They went all into the water. But we're gonna win this game. I mean, it's 6 versus 3, so they just wrap up. And there goes the last enemy ship, which is the CV. And here's the result of the game. 154k damage. This is by far my best game in the Amalfi. And almost 2500 base XP. I was quite surprised here. But I mean, sometimes you get lucky games, and the enemy did cooperate quite a bit this time. I mean, they showed broadsides and whatnot, something that doesn't always happen. So I would say my average game is probably like 70k or something. Oh, actually I know why I did so well. Check out the time spent in battle. 1337. That's why I did so well. So, let's take a look at the Amalfi or Verona in port. It is a very good looking ship in my opinion. Like, she looks really nice. And I'm really digging the looks of the Italian cruisers. And she even has the red racing stripes, which is probably why she is so incredibly fast. But first, let's take a look at my commander skills and then upgrades. So I went with the standard cruiser-ish build on this, at the start at least. Priority target, adrenaline rush, superintendent, concealment expert. Then I was like, well, I guess I'll take expert marksman. And then I thought, well, I don't know what else to take, to be honest, because the ship doesn't fire HE, so demolition expert doesn't do anything. IFHE doesn't do anything, she doesn't suffer from super cruiser fire, so fire prevention is kind of pointless, as is basic survivability. I figured, you know, maybe I could go for anti-air with AFT and BFT, but I decided to go for survivability expert and radio location instead because, hey, this helps with destroyers, especially radio, because when you to your smokescreen, you basically go blind, and this radio can be quite helpful in those situations. In terms of upgrades, I went with a standard main arms modification, then damage control system modification. In the third slot, I actually think AA guns is probably better than aiming systems because the dispersion on the ship is already good enough. In the fourth slot, I went for steering gears, as I do basically on every cruiser. I don't think propulsion makes much sense because you're not going to be stopping that often where you're in danger, so it's kinda okay. And in the last slot, as usual, it's concealment expert. Although, considering how maneuverable Italian cruisers are, and how fast they are, steering gears might actually be worth it to try at least. But on the other hand, I suppose the concealment on them isn't great enough to try without, but it is something to try, and I think it can work out. In terms of consumables, it is a standard cruiser damage control party. It is the fuel smoke or exhaust smoke generator. This is, I think, the best consumable in the game, because it makes you disappear immediately the moment you use the skill, and it lasts for a decent amount of time. It basically allows you to go full speed, press this button, and then get out of failure. Except when ships are close enough to spot you once you fired your guns. In that case, you're kind of screwed, and maybe it isn't that amazing after all. Anyway, I really like the smoke screen. And in the last slot, you have a choice between a fighter and a spotting aircraft. Fighter is good, but I think the spotting aircraft is better because the ship has 16.1 kilometer range, so boosting it at tier 8 is sometimes quite important, especially when you're in those tier 9 and 10 games. Next up, let's take a look at the armor layout. It's fairly standard cruiser layout: 25mm bow, 25mm stern, 25mm deck, 25mm upper side plate, and 30 in the middle side plate. With an open citadel of 150mm, it's fairly big and it's fairly high in the water, meaning that you're gonna take a lot of citadels when things hit you. She does have this armor plate that's 50mm at the bow that many ships have, except there's a problem. This thing is underwater, meaning that it's not actually going to protect your citadel. So for example, look, the citadel sits above the waterline. This armor plate is below the waterline, meaning that it's not gonna protect you. For example, many ships have this kind of an armor plate, but it sits at the same level as the citadel, meaning that a battleship, for example from this angle, fires a shell, it hits this point here, and it would bounce because there's a thick armor plate here, it can't overmatch. Except on this ship, the battleship hits here and it overmatches the 25mm of the bow, and then when it goes into the citadel, and then you cry because you just took massive amounts of damage. Outside of the armor scheme though, she does have a lot of HP, 45,600. Well, this is with survivability expert, but still, it is a good amount of HP for a tier 8 cruiser. I mean, that's only a few thousand less than, for example, the Des Moines. 19% torpedo protection, which is pretty good for a cruiser. But here is the disappointment. Their range at 16.1 kilometers is fairly good, at least it's nothing to complain too much about. The main issue comes at the guns. 9 guns, which is a standard amount for a cruiser. 16-second reload is on the long side, but it's not actually that bad. Otago, for example, has the same reload. Yeah, she does have an extra gun, but, you know, it's not that big of a difference. The main issue is that she doesn't have HE. She does have SAP, and you can see, oh, SAP does 5200 damage. The problem is that at 9 guns and 16-second reload, 60 divided by 16 is 3.75, multiplied by 9, multiplied by 5200 is 175k, meaning that your SAP has 175k DPM. Of course, you'll never get that kind of DPM out of the guns, but because you'll never citadel with them, but that's technically what the DPM is like. But take this ship, for example, the Bayard. She has 211k DPM because she has twice the reload, or twice as low reload, and she has 12 guns. Sure, the HE shells don't deal as much damage per shell, but she just fires so many more of them that she just out-damages the Amalfi. And many other light cruisers at this tier and below tiers do the same thing. And even quite many heavy cruisers get to about the same level, for example the Baltimore. And you have to consider that that's with HE spam, meaning that you also have to add the fire damage that they'll do to that, which the Amalfi can never do. And so I think this reload needs to be significantly lowered, because the firepower it's nowhere near enough. It's not like the Venezia, where she actually brings more firepower than most of the other cruisers do. No, this ship brings inferior SAP firepower to HE firepower, and so this just doesn't feel good enough. Sure, the shell characteristics themselves are fairly good, but that doesn't really make up for it, because SAP is something that you can angle against, whereas you can't angle against HE. Meaning that you're gonna be at a significant disadvantage, and unless they can like add more guns to the ship, or change SAP significantly, this is not worth it. Not at all. Okay. Oh, and it's not like the AP on this is amazing either. Moving on to the torpedoes. 2x4, so you have 4 torpedoes on each side. 51 knots, meaning that they're slow. They're the standard 12 kilometers. 1 kilometer concealment, and they deal a nice 12,600 damage, which means that a penetration from a battleship might deal about as much damage as this torpedo. Well, depending on the ship. Here are the anti-air values. I found the anti-air to be quite mediocre, especially since you don't even have access to a defensive fire. Meaning that this did not at all surprise me, that it wasn't great. Now this part actually is very good on this ship. She's really fast. She doesn't have speed boost, obviously, but with a flag she goes 39 knots basically. This is... it was funny, I was sailing along next to a Hatsuharu and I literally outran her while she was using a speed boost. It was funny. And on top of that she also has an incredible 680 meter turning circle. This is really, really good at this tier for a cruiser. The 8.8 second rudder shift isn't that great, but remember how I said that maybe instead of concealment expert you might take the rudder shift? Well, this is it. This makes for a very nice dodging cruiser. Something comparable to the French ones. Of course you'd like to be slightly faster for that, but if you were slightly faster I think that would be actually the better setup. Which is surprising because I recommend concealment on almost everything. Concealment on the ship is not amazing, 11.3 kilometers. I would like it to be better, but I suppose it's fine. Another number to care about on the ship is the 8.7 kilometer detectability after firing guns in smoke, because you will smoke yourself and you will be firing your guns quite often. And honestly, the concealment is something quite lacking, but the smoke makes up for it, so it's okay-ish. I suppose with the amazing smoke, they obviously couldn't give the ship HE, and the firepower couldn't be amazing, but I would still like to see a significant buff to this, like shave off a good 4 seconds from the reload or something. And then maybe it'll be something that is good. But right now the problem is that she, even in situations that are essentially ideal for her, she isn't even amazing in those. And I would rather be quite a few other ships in those cases. She does look nice though, which I suppose is one benefit. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I would like to thank the Patreons on Patreon. Thank you very much for your continued support, One-Eyed Potato, and I hope I'll see you guys next time.